Welcome to The Pivot, stories of people who made a change. My name is Andrew Osenga, and my guest today is David French. David is a columnist for the New York Times. He is a well-known writer and author. He's a lawyer. He's a professor. He is a man of many talents, as they say. David always has such a unique and thoughtful perspective on where we are in our culture, as believers in the church, as Americans, and as somebody who never really knows where they fit between the left and the right and the conservatives and the liberals. And I always feel kind of homeless. David is somebody who used to kind of feel like he had a home and now also doesn't. And, I may not always agree with David, but he always makes me think and learn and grow. And it turns out that's actually exactly how he likes to engage with people. And that's how he learns and thinks and grows too. That was so fun to learn about. This was such a delightful conversation. I'm so glad I got to spend some time with him. And I know you're going to love it too. So here's my conversation with David French. The show's called The Pivot, and it's about what happens when life stops working. So change in career.
Ooh, I like it.
Yeah, thanks. Faith, family, health. What do you do next? So I know that you have had a number of different careers, a number of, different things that have happened in your work life. Also, you've written publicly about different times in life when you've had to make sometimes abrupt changes.
True.
So this is not a topical podcast. I'm not going to ask you about Donald Trump's latest tweet or whatever. So this will...
So you're not going to clip a controversial portion in a misleading way and put it out there so I can trend on Twitter for 3 days in the worst way possible?
It's a safe space.
Oh, okay. Wow. I have to readjust my expectations.
Good. You just kind of relax.
All right.
Hang and have a conversation. So,
all right. Sounds great.
So I first got familiar with your work through your writing on, I think it was the Dispatch, the French press. And
yeah.
But I know you had a long career before that. So I would love to know what your journey was before that. I know you got your start as a lawyer. How did you get to be writing for all of this?
That is a lot longer answer than you probably anticipated when you asked that question.
Love it. We got time.
I would just summarize my life or my professional life as, I'll just call it the accidental career. Like
amazing.
All the way through.
Wonderful.
All the way through. So I'll make a long story short. So I knew what I wanted to do when I was growing up. Like I knew it. I had no doubt. If you asked 18-year-old David French, what are you going to do? Boom. Fighter pilot, my friend. And do you know why? The only possible good answer. I saw Top Gun.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But I will say I'm a rule follower, so I interviewed with ICE more than Maverick. So yeah. So I saw them not as villains, but like almost like yin and yang on the same team, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And as was borne out by the end. But anyway, I was all about being a fighter pilot. And then I go to school. I wanted to do Air Force ROTC. And through just this kind of combination of my own incompetence plus eyesight issues and everything, like this it wasn't going to happen. Like by about my junior year, I knew I was not going to be a fighter pilot. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. I had no plan, my friend. I was graduating with a political science degree from Lipscomb University. Marvelous little college. I teach there now. But let me just put it this way. If it's the year 1991 and you're graduating with a political science degree from a small Christian college, like the world is not your oyster. Like that, it was, the opportunities were not opening up for me. And so you have to make, what am I going to do? And I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I had a friend who basically dared me to take the LSAT. When I say accidental career, my friend, I mean accidental career. Because there was literally somebody at our school, our athletic, he's now our athletic director. At the time, he was our star basketball player, who was also really smart. And he took the LSAT, scored really well, and got into Duke Law School. And a friend of mine, I was a year behind him, said, I bet you I think he's probably a lot smarter than you. You can't score as high as him on the LSAT. And so I literally took the LSAT kind of quasi on a dare. In other words, like somebody said, you can't do that well on this. And I thought, well, I'll see how I can do. And so I took the LSAT and I did better than I thought I was going to do. And at that point, I thought, as soon as I got my score, I literally said out loud to my parents, hey, I want to try to go to Harvard Law School. So this is like,
this is Legally Blonde.
To Harvard. That is exactly what I get the envelope that has my score. I open it up. I look at the score. I will never forget that. I can put myself right back in there in that moment. And I looked at my mom and dad, and I said, I'm going to Harvard Law School. Like I just said it like that. And then I applied. And by miracle, I got in.
Wow.
And just by miracle. And so then I go to law school.
Did you want to be a lawyer?
I had no clue, my friend, what I wanted to do. Like I went to law school because I thought this is an expanding my options. And by the way, I also felt like if I could get into Harvard, you just go and see what happens, right? And so I went and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know. I was kind of shy not in my interactions with peers, but in my interactions with professors. So I never really sought out mentorship. And I didn't really know much about the legal profession. Like literally, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I promise you it's correct. I didn't know what a law firm was. Like when people were saying Skadden and Arps and these big firms, I was like, what are you talking about?
I still don't really know.
And so I went through law school, but when I was there at a very contentious time. I mean, very contentious. It was 1993. There was an article written called Beirut on the Charles about the law school, about how we were torn apart by arguments over race, over sexuality, over gender, over you name it. All of the rip from the headline stuff from like the 2020s and the 20-teens, we were fighting over in the early 90s. I was shouted down in class. I formed a pro-life student group, and people would send me notes, handwritten notes, saying, "Why don't you go die, you effing fascist?"
Dang.
You know, these are my classmates, right?
They were,
and it was kind of a rough environment, and that got me interested in the Constitution and the First Amendment. It was literally my experience with people trying to censor me that got me interested in free speech and the First Amendment. So I graduate from law school. And I I did the normal path, which is you go to a big firm, but I had this First Amendment hobby and interest. And so over time, I started to do more and more First Amendment cases until like I would say 10 years out of law school, I had to make a choice. I had so many pro bono First Amendment cases that I had to choose. Am I going to continue to be a commercial litigator, like working for big companies? Or am I going to leave that and lean into my First Amendment work? So I did. I left. I left the commercial litigation world and went to public interest law. I was president of FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, and began what turned into an 11-year career focused on the First Amendment.
Wow.
And during all of that time, I went from FIRE to the Alliance Defending Freedom and then the American Center for Law and Justice, all doing First Amendment work. And
First Amendment work, what is that?
Defending, and almost all it was in education. So I would defend a professor who was fired for his political views, or I would defend a student group that was thrown off campus because of its personnel policies, or I would defend a student who was graded badly because of their religion,
Wow.
or I would, if people were facing punishment or reprisal because of their protected speech, or their protected free exercise of religion, or without due process, I was your guy. And I defended people on the right and the left. I was when I was at FIRE was a very consistent, it didn't matter who you were, far left, far right, secular, religious, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, we defended everybody. Now the ADF and ACLJ were more focused on conservatives, but my First Amendment defense was absolutely consistent for more than a decade. And so if your rights were being violated, right, left, Christian, not, I would intervene. And so during that time, I got a lot more I got very frustrated at the media, not necessarily because of bias, but just because I didn't feel like they really understood the cases. Like if you take a beat reporter, this is going back, 20 years. If you take a beat reporter on law, 90% of what they were covering was criminal law back in the day. So they're going to the courthouse and they're looking at like the filings and who's been charged with what, and they cover criminal law. And then once in a blue moon in your hometown, you get a big free speech case. Well, you've never studied free speech law. You don't, this is totally new to you.
Sure.
And so I got frustrated. A lot of the coverage, I felt like it was sometimes uninformed, sometimes biased. And so I started a practice of whenever we would have a new free speech case, I would write an op-ed and we'd started writing at Fire. We started a blog. And so I started writing about the Constitution. And then later in life, I decided to join the military and I deployed to Iraq and I started writing about that experience. And by 2015, I'd been a lawyer for 21 years and I was writing a lot, and I had the same decision. I have one career and another hobby.
Yeah.
Do I leave the career for the hobby? And I did. I went from public interest law to journalism. And in May of 2015, I joined National Review, really, sort of seeing myself very much as a conservative lawyer in the conservative movement, writing for a conservative publication. I felt very sort of comfortable in that world. That was my world. That was my tribe. May of 2015, that's when I joined National Review. The next month, Donald Trump comes down the escalator.
Oh, wow.
And by, I would say, November of 2015, I already knew everything had changed.
Yeah.
That all the old categories were going to be blown up. I wasn't going to feel comfortable in this new Trumpist reality. I was definitely not going to be a part of it. It took me until like February, March of 2016 to realize that Trump was going to win the nomination definitively, and that I would have a choice of whether, for the first time in my adult life, was I going to not support the Republican nominee? And that's when I came out. I think it was March of 2016 and said, nope, I'm out, not doing it, no way. And then kind of the rest is history from there. It just, the way in which the culture developed, the way in which journalism developed and changed, like everything has been sort of morphed and twisted and changed to some degree by the political fights of the last 10 years. So that's the too long answer to your relatively short question.
Wow, that's amazing. So you said writing was a hobby for you in 2013.
Yes. Yeah.
So like as a kid, did you get the bug for writing?
I got the bug for writing when I was in law school because I got the bug for persuasion. And one thing I loved about the practice of law was walking into a courtroom with a judge and just knowing, okay, how do I win this person over to my side? Or walking in and looking at 12 people in a jury and saying, okay, how do I win these folks over? And it was, it's interesting. It's not that different from, say, evangelism in a way,
Sure.
Because you have a position that you are, convinced is correct and right and truthful and good and just and all of this. And how do you win someone over to truth and goodness and justice? That is a really remarkable challenge. It's an incredible, and it's intellectually, emotionally, theologically, spiritually stimulating to try to do all of that. And so I loved it. And so I looked at my written work as like an extension of my courtroom work. And then over time, I felt like my written work was starting to eclipse my courtroom work sort of in like importance and prominence in my mind and heart.
Were there writers that inspired you as you getting into that work?
Oh, yeah. So beginning early in college, high school is, I think, the first time I read a collection of essays by George Will.
He was
so
the
I was
National
always,
Review, right?
I was always extremely. He was Washington Post, and so
Okay.
So he was the most influential pundit of like the Reagan era. Ronald Reagan would have dinner with him,
Wow.
and so I was a political nerd in high school, and so I got into reading. George Will, but then in law school, I broadened out and began to read a lot of people, including people I didn't agree with, people I agreed with. And I will tell you, this is going to sound kind of interesting and counterintuitive, but one of the most interesting people to me to read was Andrew Sullivan. Okay, so Andrew Sullivan at the time was what you would call a heterodox conservative who was and is gay, but also often very disliked by the LGBT community. And so he was just his own thing. He was completely independent. And he was also a very, very good writer. And I found myself being consistently inspired by his intellectual independence. Even though I would disagree with him strongly about a lot of things, he always made me think. And so he introduced me to the value of a writerly voice who challenges you, who defies your thinking. George Will, I was conservative. George Will's conservative. And the way I looked at George Will is George Will was the guy who was putting the thoughts that I had better than I did. In other words, he was taking all the inclinations and instincts and impulses that I had, and he was putting them to words. And it was really wonderful to read a more eloquent expression of my own values than I could give.
Sure.
That's one kind of writing experience, and a reading experience. In some ways, that's the most enjoyable because it makes you feel smarter than you are. Like, oh, I had no idea my thoughts were this interesting, right?
Yeah. Oh, look at me. I'm so smart.
I had no idea my thoughts could be this sophisticated. Then along comes like an Andrew Sullivan, and he is like, okay, I'm pouring all of that same talent into something that is challenging what you already believe.
Yeah.
And I found that, and again, when I say this, I mean, George Will, he's the GOAT, right? George Will is George Will. But what I found was that being challenged for me was better for me than being affirmed. And because if I was just being affirmed, I felt like that didn't have a good effect on me. It made me more kind of cocky, sort of more convinced of my own rightness. But reading a lot of people who had very different values, but had thought them through very carefully and was making the best possible expression of that point of view, I found that incredibly valuable because I found that, wait a minute, if I don't have the tools to resist or argue or contradict this argument, maybe I'm not right. and I think that value of reading, and Andrew Sullivan's not the only one by any means, but sure. I really got into the world of reading opposing writing by reading Andrew Sullivan. And I didn't disagree with him on everything. I agreed with him on many things and disagreed with him on many things. But that's what taught me the value of checking your own beliefs and scrutinizing and interrogating your own beliefs. Because we're not God. We're wrong about a bunch of stuff. And we don't know what we're wrong about, obviously, because if we knew we were wrong, we'd change, right? So to learn that we're wrong, somebody has to show us. Somebody has to challenge us. And so that process early in my law school and then legal career, being challenged by smart writers, not only, changed me, not only deepened my own thinking and the level of my own thinking, but it also inspired me to think that maybe I could do that. Yeah. Maybe I could challenge people.
That's inspiring to me. Well, because now you write all the time, right? Like that's your
too much.
Well, that's your main thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
when you stopped being a writer, when you stopped being a lawyer and you started being a writer, at what point did you go out on your own?
I never did. I was with National Review from 2015 till 2019.
Oh.
And then in 2019, I left National Review to go work for The Dispatch, which is founded by Steve Hayes and Jonah Goldberg. And I helped start it. I was on the writers when we launched.
Oh.
And my newsletter, The French Press, was part of The Dispatch. And so
got it. I see. I understand.
Yeah. So, and it's very interesting because it's going to sound weird to say this, but it took me leaving National Review and going to a very small, at the time, startup publication that was also conservative, but more independent conservative than, say, National Review, which is more ensconced within the conservative movement. And it took me going to this small startup for my writing to really break out of what you might call the conservative ghetto or the conservative world. That it was my Sunday newsletter called the French Press, and my Sunday newsletter, which focused on faith, that really took off on a level that I never anticipated. Like I never thought. But it was actually, interestingly enough, an early indicator of this increased interest that people have in religion right now. It was sort of I thought, wait, a Sunday morning newsletter on religion? I mean, I could see why evangelicals would read it. If it's written, an evangelical writing a newsletter to evangelicals, I could see why they would read it. But I quickly found out that I had a giant pile of readers who were atheist, Jewish, Muslim, mainline, Catholic, you name it, Orthodox, just from all over. And with just an enormous, intense interest in the topic. And so that Sunday newsletter just blew up to a degree that that I never expected. And I think it's what actually led me to the Times, because I think it was that Sunday newsletter that, my current bosses at the Times started getting and reading, and they liked it. And I think that that's ultimately why I ended up at the New York Times.
Wow. So I'm not the only person that found your writing in the French press.
No, far from it. Far from it.
Wow.
And I will never forget the point where I knew, oh my gosh, we got a tiger by the tail, is I wrote this long thing about two pieces early. One was about the faith of Pete Buttigieg and the differences between mainline theology and evangelical theology, and how
interesting
and how different they are. And then not long after that, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this moment where Paula White talked about Trump faith advisors praying for the abortion of satanic pregnancies. And
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so I wrote a newsletter that had my favorite title of everything that I've ever written. It was just simple. It was so simple. It was Satanic Pregnancies Explained. And so it introduced people to spiritual warfare. And so if you'd grown up in sort of Pentecostal or Pentecostal adjacent spaces, you knew all about spiritual warfare. Yeah. You'd read this Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness. And
I did.
As I explained it, what was the difference between a Baptist prayer group and a Pentecostal prayer group? A Baptist prayer group, before a missionary would go out, would pray like, Lord, soften people's hearts, before he goes to Nigeria, and open people's minds. The Pentecostal would be like, Lord, smite the prince of Nigeria, and may your angelic And so I was explaining all of that, right? And people the response was just overwhelming, And I couldn't believe it. And so, and then, it just kind of grew from there. And I think that's what led me to the Times. I also wrote for the Atlantic during that period while I was at the Dispatch, but I'm 99% sure it was sort of my writing at the Dispatch and the Sunday French Press that brought me to the Times.
Wow. Seeing you in the Times and the Atlantic, it's inspiring. And I have to tell you, I've watched you and your wife and your circle of friends navigate this really tricky line where there are all these battle lines drawn, and you've decided to kind of make your own camp and your own army, and that in most ways doesn't even want to fight. And I'm a musician, and in my little circle of friends, my little community, for many years, we've often been too Christian for mainstream music and not Christian enough for the Christian spaces, or maybe not the right kind of Christian. And now here you're the Christian guy at the New York Times, and
Christian world.
Yeah. This isn't a question, I realize.
Yeah.
But when I talk about it in these terms, does that resonate in any way with you?
Yeah. That absolutely resonates. So it's funny because a lot of the readers, if I get criticism from sort of time subscribers, it kind of goes along like this. It's like, sort of far left, they just hate me. Let's just, yeah. I know why, they protested when I was hired.
Guy. Yeah.
No. This goes all the way back to law school, right? You remember what I was saying, so I'm very used to sort of very far left, like hating me. But if I was going to get the criticism that's more thoughtful, as opposed to you Christian bigot, evil, but if you're going to get to the thoughtful, it's more like something along the lines of David's just too religious. That it's like there's too much religion in his columns. There's too many references to Jesus. I read this all the time. I like David, but I wish he'd just dial it back. Is sort of one of the critiques that I get. And then on the other hand, a lot of people are like, you're just not enough. And what they mean by not enough is really quite specific. They don't mean not enough in the sense of I don't write about Jesus enough. What they mean is you don't go out and defend conservative Christianity enough. That, in other words, you need to be writing about abortion more. You need to be writing about trans issues more. And also from a very specific angle. So you have to be essentially what they're wanting me to be is essentially, it's almost like I want you to be the lawyer for the religious right. I want you to go out there and argue for us, for our position, day in, day out. We want you on the wall. We want you on that wall. We need you on that wall. And I just don't see that as my job at all. Like, I'm not a lawyer anymore. I don't represent anyone's interests. So when you hire a lawyer, you're not hiring somebody to take an unbiased assessment of your case and then go to the jury and say, my client's right here, but not right here. And you kind of make up your mind. No, my job is to talk about what's good about my client. The other side does the other job. And it works because it's a system channeled through rules and regulations and rules of evidence and things like that. That same construct doesn't work in political argument because there's not a judge saying, counselor, you can't say that, that's false, or counselor, that's inadmissible, or no, what ends up happening is that a lot of people look at somebody who's like a conservative columnist at the Times and think, well, this guy just needs to be defending the Republican Party. That's what he should be doing. And I will defend the Republican Party when I think it's right, and I'll critique it when I think it's wrong. That's how I see my job. I remember when I was first hired at National Review, I was talking to Jonah Goldberg, dear friend, great guy, great writer. And I was getting career advice because I was making a big career change. And he said, your job is to tell the truth as best as you can see it. That's your job. Good. Your job is not to defend the conservative movement. Your job is not to defend the Christian church. Your job is to tell the truth. And if I look and I see, say corruption in the church, my job is not to minimize that. My job is not to sweep that under the rug so that people will think better of the church than maybe the facts warrant, right? And so I really see my job not as I am the partisan representative of republicanism in the New York Times. I see my job as I am a person just like all my other colleagues, left, right, center, who are trying to make sense of the world. That's what my job is. And one of the great freedoms of an opinion columnist is that in our effort to make sense of the world, we can inject our own thoughts and feelings and impressions about this and our own normative judgments about like, this is good, this is bad, this should happen, or this should not happen. But the bottom line is I'm really trying to help my readers make sense of the world. That's the core, in my view, the core job description. Just help people understand what is going on. And to the extent that my opinion matters, it should matter only to the extent that I'm actually helping them understand what's going on. And so I just see my role so differently than I think a lot of people see the role of a pundit or a columnist.
That's interesting. So now you also work with an organization called Good Faith that you started with some friends. You've got a website, a podcast, a curriculum. Do you see that as different from the work that you do, the New York Times?
No.
Is that the
No,
same good faith?
no. It's all present on the same continuum. Now, I would think the after party is a little bit different because that is a project that is sort of designed to achieve a particular. It's in the same vein, but the thing about the after party is it's both analysis, here's what's gone wrong, and exhortation, here's what we can do right. And it's probably a lot of my writing is more analysis than exhortation. And I think that the after party is less analysis and more exhortation.
Okay,
If that
so you've
makes
got
sense.
good faith and the after party.
Very church focused. So like the after party is not something that, I could say, like, if you're a Hindu or atheist or Jewish, you could watch the after party and there are a lot of values that you would like in there for sure. But it's really aimed at an evangelical audience.
Got it. Okay. We were at an event a few years ago together. It was the Porter's Gate writing camp. And I met you there.
Yeah.
We had a couple little conversations. And all of a sudden, you guys moved to Chicago. What happened?
Oh, it's easy. Grandchildren.
Oh, I love that.
So you have, so that's the main reason. I mean, there's a primary reason, secondary, tertiary. I mean, there's lots of reasons, but the primary reason is my daughter is a 1L at the University of Chicago Law School, and she has a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and another one on the way. And so, she needed help. And so we came up to Chicago to help. And so right now, while we're recording the podcast, the 5-year-old and 3-year-old are upstairs in our apartment building with my wife, Nancy. And Nancy is winning like Grandma of the Year. She takes care of those kids 4 days a week, all day. And like that gives, and it's, it's and we all our whole family lives within like a mile of each other, just a few blocks of each other here in Chicago. And so we're living that very close, extended family life. And it's just been wonderful. I don't know what the long-term holds. Our permanent address and our permanent life is still in Tennessee, but we're up there helping my oldest daughter in Chicago right now. And they say it's very true. Grandchildren have a powerful gravitational pull, and we've gone through our first Chicago winter. We survived. But we have a place in Nashville. I teach at Lipscomb. I taught at Vanderbilt Law School this past semester. So we have a foot in Nashville and a foot in Chicago.
That's so fun. That sounds like a lot of work. How often are you back in Nashville? Are you are you coming back every week, every couple weeks?
During the semester, it's every week. Yeah. So
that's a lot.
Yeah, I teach a class. I teach an undergrad class, and then I have a lot of fun teaching what's called a lifelong learners class, which is like an adult education class that's run through Lipscomb and open to anybody. But, so I teach on topics that are like civics and constitution oriented. So I had a class called Why American Politics Went Insane. I had a class on 5 constitutional amendments to save America. I'm about to teach another class on 5 overlooked Supreme Court cases that have changed your life.
Wow.
So I'm going to do, I do things like that. Yeah. That are really fun to talk about. And I love doing it. I love teaching. I love teaching undergrads. I love teaching senior citizens. It's a lot of fun.
I live a couple blocks from Lipscomb, so I'm going to come and sit in the back of some of your classes sometime. That sounds like so much fun. I would love to talk about some of the responses that you get from your work.
Oh, gosh.
I'm so curious. How about how you respond to it? So we live in an age where you can respond so quickly, right? Like you could just fire off a response publicly in like 4 seconds when somebody writes you a nasty email. And obviously we have some leaders who publicly do that. How do you handle those things when you get something, you get an attack that comes at you because you are a public person and you write things that might bother somebody, that stir up a hornet's nest? Do you have a process for how you handle some of those criticisms, for taking in some of those harsh words that you talked about, some of whether they come from the left or the right, about how you're going to respond to that publicly.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really sort of evolved over time. So back in 2015, 2016, when I first started writing, I think it's almost fair to say I don't think I would let almost any challenge go unanswered. Like if somebody wrote something negative, I'd respond, right? And if somebody tweeted something negative, I'd respond. And also at National Review, we had a very different rhythm of writing. I was supposed to write every day. I had to have at least one piece a day. And so when you're doing that, one of the easiest ways to have a piece is to respond to somebody who said something about you, right? Very quickly, I learned that was untenable and unwise. So what was untenable about it? Well, as I was more vocal in my critique of Trump, more criticism poured in. Some of it vicious, some of it really threatening and scary. But it was just more and more and more, to the point where I just couldn't respond to it all. Like I just couldn't. So it was untenable. Then I began to realize some people were taking me on because they wanted me to respond.
That's interesting.
In other words, so what's happening is, let's suppose let's just use very crude math. Let's just imagine you have 100,000 Twitter followers and somebody has 10,000. If they criticize the person with the 100,000 and the person with the 100,000 responds, two things happen. One, you make the criticism more prominent, 10 times more prominent, right? So all of a sudden, 10 times more people will read the criticism.
David French bump.
And then the other thing is you elevate that other person. So you kind of lend your voice and your platform to them. And so sounds naive of me, but I didn't realize it was kind of a thing that people do, is they punch at people with larger platforms or whatever to try to trigger the fight, which then boosts their own voice in the public square. And I was playing my role to a T, my friend. If you went after me, I was like, okay, I'll respond. And so then what that ended up doing, I thought what that was doing was addressing criticisms. No, I was incentivizing criticisms. My responses were in many ways incentive. Even if I got like the better of the exchange, like if you're going to look at it, you're going to say, oh, in that debate, David clearly won that. In this attention economy, that's not always the calculus. The calculus isn't always, do I win the debate or do I lose the debate? It's, do I get eyeballs or do I not get eyeballs? And so a lot of what was happening was I was actually contributing to my own misery, for lack of a better term, by constantly responding. I was feeding this beast. Exactly. And so I just decided no. But at the same time, there's a challenge. And here's the challenge. I'm not right about everything. I'm wrong about stuff. I'm not God. I'm not Jesus. And so if I just stop paying attention to criticism, that's kind of like putting yourself in the God/Jesus position. Well, I've got it all figured out. I don't need to listen to critique. Well, that's terrible. If you become that kind of person, you're horrible. Like you become one of these, arrogant, awful people who are just always operating under the assumption that they're right, that everyone else around them is wrong. That's how you get to some of these horrible public figures, is they just live with this bulletproof sense of moral superiority. But at the same time, if you let in all of the criticism, you'll be in the fetal position. Like who can withstand it? Like it's, I would urge you to not read my Twitter replies.
I bet it's horrible.
Like, it's horrible. And so,
I took Instagram off my phone. I couldn't.
You're smart. And so here's how I try to figure it out. My goal is to be a person with a thick skin and a soft heart. And here's how I harmonize that. If criticism that I get, if I feel like, using my best judgment, that it is trolling, bad faith, malicious, I screen it out. But if I believe that it is good faith, well argued, I want to take it in because I'm not right about everything. I need to take in thoughtful critique. But that opens you up, that makes you more vulnerable. And so in that sense, you're never, if you adopt that approach, you can live in this world, but it's not comfortable because you will take in that critique. You will listen to it. But I think I couldn't do my job if I didn't. If I shudder to think what kind of person I'd be if I just screened out all kinds of critique because I need to hear it, right? I need to hear it. So I really try. There are people in this, public square who I know by experience are liars, malicious, vicious, and I just screen them out. I mute them. I block them. I just totally screen them out. But if there's somebody who's critical of me that I know is thoughtful, who exhibits the fruit of the Spirit, who is interesting, who's fair, who's factual, I let that in. I will read every single syllable of that. I'll give you a perfect example. There was a great piece in a publication that I subscribed to called Mere Orthodoxy that was very much disagreeing with my position on the Respect for Marriage Act, which I had supported the Respect for Marriage Act, which was compromise legislation that protected religious liberty, but also protected same-sex marriage in the event that Obergefell was overturned. I agreed with that law. I got a lot of criticism, angry criticism from the Christian conservatives. Many people wanted me disciplined by my church. But then other people were like, people said I'm not a Christian. They said I'm a heretic. I'm a demon, all of this stuff. But then, I got a very thoughtful piece of pushback in Mere Orthodoxy. I read every word of it. It was really well written. It made me think about some things. But these are, that's the difficulty. How do you screen out bad faith malice? How do you let in good faith critique? And how do you determine the difference? And so if you're doing it right, you're never going to feel entirely comfortable. You're always going to have some questions about have I let in too much or not enough? You'll never feel like I've got this mastered if you're doing it right. If you're doing it wrong, I think you feel like you've got it mastered.
That's good. Okay. You mentioned the fruit of the Spirit a minute ago, and that makes me think over the past few years, right? The church in America has just seemingly kind of demonized some of the teachings of Jesus, for the poor and the orphan and the outcast, especially, thinking about self-control and patience and forgiveness. Those things are not prized often, and yet we seem to be kind of cheering for cruelty and greed and pride and violence, and it's tearing families apart. It's caused millions of people to walk away from the church. How do we recover from this?
That's a great question. Repentance. I mean, we have a lot of conversation right now about, are we in the middle of a religious revival or not? I think it's really hard to tell from data whether we're in a religious revival. I do think that we are in a wave of renewed religious interest. I see that everywhere around me. Whether it's resulting in what is kind of a religious revival is a different thing, right? And I wrote a piece not long ago, I said, where it's an open question to me whether we're in the middle of a religious revival or a religious revolution. And the revival usually begins with, I have sinned. A revolution begins with, you have sinned. And now, that doesn't mean that revolutions aren't necessary. I mean, we live in a country founded by a revolution, right? We said to King George III, you have sinned. So revolutions can be appropriate. Revivals are always appropriate. There's not a circumstance where the words, there's not a circumstance where the words, Lord, forgive me for I have sinned. Lord, transform my heart. Lord, renew my spirit. That is always appropriate. Even if you're on the biggest spiritual high of your life, or you're feeling like, man, compared to 6 months ago, I'm just a better person. you're still deeply flawed. And you still have cause to say, Lord, forgive me for I've sinned. And my question is, especially when we look sort of at the evangelical church, what's our posture? Our posture seems to be very definitively looking at the whole culture and going, you have all sinned. At the same time that our own evangelical church is shot through with massive amounts of corruption. And then has the gall to turn around and say to other Christians, not everybody, there are lots of Trump voting evangelicals who do not agree with this, who I have tons of wonderful friends and family members who voted for Trump every time, right? So, but there are Trump supporting people who will turn around and have the gall to say you're not a Christian, or it's non-Christian or anti-Christian to not vote for Donald Trump or to vote for one of his opponents. And that is just it is so destructive. It is so destructive because to me, the best possible case for Trump is, I understand he has deep and profound flaws, but so do his opponents. And it's a hard call, but I think on net, it's going to be better for America if he's president than Kamala Harris. Like, to me, that is a case for Trump that I can respect. Sure. I disagree with it, but I respect it. The case for Trump I have zero respect for is, this is the only option for Christians. He's God's appointed man to save America, or, all of that nonsense that we've seen. And so, that in that circumstance, I keep getting reminded in the book of Isaiah where it says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. I think the evangelical church has been calling evil good when it comes to Trump on many, many counts for many, many years. And it is dreadful. It is deeply damaging to the church. It's deeply damaging to other human beings. And I'll even go further. I will say in the evangelical church, after 10 years of Trump has influenced the church more than the church has influenced Trump. I think that it's hard to argue otherwise. Is Trump a kinder man now? Is he a more godly man? No, by no means. No, he's comparing himself to God. I mean, he does that, right? Or a doctor. Which there's a quick test of your gullibility if you believe that explanation. But but I know, I experience it. I see it every day. Lots of parts of the church are more like Trump. They interact like Trump. They're vicious like Trump. They lie like Trump. They're malicious like Trump. They're cruel like Trump. I see it. I absorb it. I face it all the time. More than other people. Lies, cruelty, malice from Christians all the time, every day. And it's just relentless. It's just absolutely relentless. And here's one thing. This is something that for a lot of you folks out there who are listening, who I'm not describing you, and I'm describing these malicious people, but you might be skeptical that actual damage is being done to the church. And I will tell you this, you should spend time talking to non-Christians who have been engaged in public controversies with conservative evangelicals in the last 10 years. And ask them what their experience is. And what they will tell you is horrific. Death threats, name calling, acts of intimidation, attempts to cancel people. It's just story after story after story after story. And I know there are evangelicals who will hear that and not believe me. They'll go, that's what the far left does. That's what those crazy people do on campus, or the angry Twitter mobs do. I'm like, guys, you have no idea. If you raise your voice in a public way and you're a Christian against Donald Trump, you're fortunate. You're lucky if you escape the vicious vitriol that comes pouring upon you like an avalanche. And here's what really bothers me. It doesn't come from most people. Sure, it definitely does not. It does not. But most people in the church don't lift one finger to stop it. Not one finger to stop it. And I will tell you this is something that just grieved me so much. When we first started getting threats and racist attacks against our youngest daughter, when we came out against Trump in 2015, my pastors, they rallied behind us without question. My closest friends, they rallied behind us. But for lots and lots and lots of Christians I interacted with that I thought were friendly to me, they were more angry that I wasn't supporting Trump than they were that my family had been threatened.
Whoa.
And that is messed up. That is upside down. And I had no idea. I had no idea when I said that I wasn't going to vote for Trump, that I had no clue that that was going to cost me ultimately my church, my denomination, countless people, friends, friendly acquaintances, some friends who just completely shunned us. Nancy and I, my wife and I, we had a rule that we were not going to break any friendships over politics, but we couldn't stop people from breaking friendships with us.
What a rule.
And it's just staggering. It's just, and look, I know that there have been anti-Trump figures who've treated pro-Trump people terribly. Sure. I know that. It is absolutely, and it's awful. And when I see it, I say something about it. When I see somebody being treated unfairly, I try to speak up about it because I know that it's very painful to be treated unjustly and unfairly and to have people who you thought had some modicum of respect for you do nothing, say nothing, and then turn around and go, well, I'm not a bad guy. Why does anyone think that I'm a bad guy? Well, if you see injustice taking place in the name of Christ, especially when I see you being very willing and eager to condemn secular people, and then you zip the mouth shut when it comes to one of your political allies, that's a big problem. And in 1 Corinthians 5 is pretty clear about this stuff. 1 Corinthians 5 is like, who are you to judge those outside the church? God will be the judge. But those inside the church, expel the wicked from among you. So we are supposed to have this very high standard in the church. And, look, witness and love your neighbor and speak truth in the larger culture. But really, that's not our domain to judge and rule in the same way that the church is. And we've just flip it completely backwards. We just flip it upside down. And I think part of the reason is that we have taught generations of people that America will be better off if evangelicals are in charge. And then if an evangelical institution is broken or corrupt, then often that message is we don't want to talk about that because that will give ammunition to people who will say, see, we can't have the church in charge. And the reality is we should be, if we have this belief that Christians in politics, that Christians in office is a blessing, that it would be a blessing for America if there were more Christians in office, then corruption in evangelical spaces should grieve us so deeply. It should motivate us so strongly to intervene, to wipe it out, so that we can approach the world with clean hands. So we'll never be able to do it entirely. We're always going to be flawed. We're always going to be imperfect. But we've got it backwards. We've got it totally backwards. We will defend religious institutions from proper righteous accountability, and we will often try to inflict extreme penalties and extreme punishment on sort of people who are outside of our tribe. And it's just flipping it upside down.
Wow. Thanks for that. Well, let me end with this question, which I think kind of addresses that. It brings it back to where we sort of started with you as a writer. I read a quote from you recently that you said something to a group of, I think it was college students, about writing. Mm-hmm. And you said this quote, which I thought was really fascinating. You said, "Write with regret and not outrage." I don't know if you remember saying that, but
yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So the origin of that advice is when I was second year out of law school, I submitted a brief to a senior attorney in my firm a draft brief that I wrote. And he was a retired federal judge. And he read the brief, and then he called me into his office. And I said, David, if I could give you one piece of advice to guide your writing for the rest of your life, it is write with regret, not outrage. And I looked at him puzzled, and he said, this is good writing. It's all outrage. And I will tell you this, every judge receives nothing but outrage. Every case is the worst case. Every situation is the most egregious situation. And if somebody comes in and they write with sobriety and regret, now what that does is it demonstrates respect for your opponents. It demonstrates a sober mind, and it also demonstrates a sense of proportion, because not everything is equally outrageous. So that then when something is outrageous and you say that it is, you'll be heard. And so I have really tried to do that. Now I have a personality and a temperament, like my whole family, we're prone to hyperbole. You should hear our family discussions and arguments. Like we are like hyperbolic in my friendships, our family, and we have fun with it. But hyperbole is a bad practice in writing, unless it's very, 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 very clear you're being hyperbolic for humor. It's very bad practice. And so what we did for years and years is hyperbole is the worst thing you can do in the world. And so what we did for years and years in political writing was we just whipped people into frenzy constantly, so that when actually outrageous things happened, we lacked the language for them. We'd already wasted it on things like, Mitt Romney having binders full of women, or Barack Obama and his beer summit, or whatever. And you hear about, and like you read some of these stories that people got furious about in 10, 15 years ago. And you're like, that was what? What? That divided us compared to what we're dealing with now? And you really realize that we desensitized, when I say we, the political class, desensitized America to true political problems and true political crises by calling everything a crisis and everything a problem. And so one of the reasons why I try to write with regret rather than outrage is, one, it's a more proportionate. And number two, it also is it's also loving your neighbor in an interesting way, because you're not treating them as an enemy. You're treating them as a friend who's made mistakes. That's what regret is. Sadly, my friend said, is very different from that evil person. Those are very different ways of approaching people. And I would much rather, and I think, applying the golden rule, if I'm mistaken about something, I would much more appreciate it if somebody says, David, I really respect you, but sadly, I think you're wrong about this, versus you monster. What are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to you monster? Or are you going to listen to, hey, I have respect for you, but on this area, I think ... Obviously, we're going to listen to the latter more than the former. Obviously. And so regret grants, it's in an interesting way, it's sort of compassionate and considerate of your political opponents.
Well, that's why it's such a gift to have your voice out there, David. It really is.
Well, thank you.
Look, you got grandkids upstairs, and it's such a huge gift to talk to you today. Thank you for your time and just sharing this with us. It's a huge, huge treat.
Well, thanks so much. It was I really enjoyed chatting with you, and thanks so much for reaching out.
Thank you, man. This was wonderful. Well, we talked just a little bit there about the after party. That is something that he and Russell Moore, another old Pivot guest, and their friend Curtis Chang started a few years ago. It's a curriculum that churches can engage with to help them think about how to engage with politics here in our hyper-partisan world. And I cannot recommend it enough. It's something that's so thoughtful, and it's not the left, it's not the right. It's how do you use the Bible to think about politics as your own church community. And I love that they have done that. And I know some of the people in that team besides the three of them, and they're so thoughtful and prayerful about it. And they also have a podcast called Good Faith, and they do some other writing, and they have a newsletter, and I just can't recommend what they do enough. So you should check out Good Faith and the After Party. We'll have all that stuff in the show notes. I'm a big fan of what they do. If you want to support me and my work, you can do that at my website and my Substack, andrewosenga.com. And that's where you can support the podcast here and my other work that I do, find my music, all that. Some fun news is that Anchor Hymns has some new music that's about to come out. We've got a song coming out in a few weeks, and a month later we'll have another song, and a month later we'll have another song. We actually have music that's going to come out for the next year. So we recorded an album and another album of all songs based on the prayers of the Every Moment Holy books. And we did this in partnership with our friend Doug McKelvey, who wrote those books, and with a grant from our friends at Samford University. So we made a live album down there with some students there just kind of going crazy, and packed out a room. It was so fun. And then we did an acoustic album the next day. And so I'm thrilled with how those records are turning out. So that first song, called Let It Be Yours, comes out on July 24th, Friday, July 24th. So can't wait for you guys to check that out. I've been talking on here a lot about the Quiet Hours books that I'm writing, these series of prayer books, the kind of the Book of Common Prayer, sort of Eugene Peterson style, sort of made modern so we can use them without a thesaurus and a calendar and a stack of other books next to them, and I'm really, really excited about them, and they're taking so much work, and I'm glad for that. I want them to be as great as they can be. I know that other people could make them better, but I'm the one that's doing them, so they will be as good as I can make them. And to do that, that means I'm not going to have a podcast out in 2 weeks, because frankly, this podcast is mostly a one-man show. I work with an amazing production company that helps kind of take the show once I'm done with it and get it out on the internet, and they make the graphics and they help get guests on, and I'm so thankful for them, the Four Eyes Media team. They're so wonderful, and they're always like, Andrew, when are you going to send us the next podcast? And they're doing their job, and I'm so grateful for them. And right now, I just have to tell them it's going to be a little bit, because you know what? I've got to make these books, and I want to finish those things well. And to do that, we're just going to call it a summer break, because you know what? It's summer, and in summer you get to take a break. So there are a lot of old episodes. We've been making this for a year now, this version of it, and if you haven't heard every episode, go find another one. There are also like 100 other episodes. Go listen to Alan Levi's episode. We recorded Alan Levi's interview while he was writing Theo of Golden, and now that's like the biggest book on earth. Go check that out if you haven't heard it. We might even re-release that. I don't know. We'll be back in a month, maybe 6 weeks. I'm not sure. We've got a bunch of great interviews lined up. I'm just not going to do them. I'm not going to interview people until I finish these books, because I want to write them as well as I can, and then I will take a nap. Maybe go watch The Odyssey or something, and then I'm going to do some interviews and get the podcast back on the air. So that's my deal to you, because I want this podcast to be great, and I want those books to be great, and I just can't make them all great at the same time. And so thanks for your understanding and your patience and your prayers. And I hope that you will love the books when they come out, and I'm going to ask for your support. And I really hope that you love them, and I hope they can serve you really well. I've never been more excited and nervous and hopeful about a thing I've worked on in my entire life. I genuinely think that these might be the reason that God made me like writing and reading, is for me to write these books for other people. So I sure hope they turn out well, and that people like them, and that they help people connect with Jesus in a new way. Okay. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share. So I'll see you guys a little later. And I hope you are having a great summer and are staying cool. And I'm so thankful for your support and your listening. And wasn't this so fun getting to talk to David French? How cool is that? You're probably hearing my dog. Her name's Pippa. That means I think my in-laws are here. So I'm going to go say hey to them. and edit this podcast and ship it out, and then not open the little podcast program for a little while. All right. Thank you all. Go do something awesome.